This is episode 673 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Uh, Wally, interesting story coming at us from Las Cruces today. It's sometime in the time between the end of 2024 and the beginning of 2025, or the time we are in now, a entertainment district down in the Las Cruces city area, Amador Entertainment District, closed. And, businesses come and go all the time. That's all creative destruction. But I found some of the statements made by the soon to be former owner of the facility interesting. I want to get your take on some of this. So he says in the article, you can find me quoting from him at airsoфenchantment.com. 2024 was a tough year for a lot of people in town. It was a tough year for a lot of businesses, and Amador was no exception. Furthermore, given where things are in the market, it's time to do it, meaning shut down. If we felt there was a light at the end of the tunnel, we could probably figure out a way to keep it going. But at this time, it's not something that we're prepared to do. Now, generally speaking, I would say that these are moderately good times for New Mexico, at least based on the oil and gas industry, based on the revenue picture. Obviously, we've criticized and will continue to criticize the lack of action to broaden the economic development picture in New Mexico. And this seems to be a case of somebody saying in real terms about real life situations that oil and gas money isn't really being filtered throughout all geographical and other kind of areas of the economy besides oil and gas and state government.
Yeah, you don't have to read between the lines. I think he just said it, but he said it extremely politely. Doña County and Las Cruces, they're not a whole lot different than Bernalillo County. They like to tax things. They like to overregulate. They don't like. Well, Cruces is a little better, but they don't like to deal with crime nearly as much. And so, we just kind of the headwinds facing business are definitely in play there. And I think the thought is, and this is the one that's actually probably the more powerful thought is, in the future, are things going to get better? Is the business climate going to get better by what's happening from the political point of view? And this person doesn't seem to think so. And I'm not sure that in the very short term or even the short or medium term, they're necessarily wrong, because New Mexico has shown a great ability to spend oil and gas money, but not necessarily to use it in such a way that encourages development of more businesses outside of that industry.
Yeah, and it is something that we have repeatedly kind of expressed our concerns over, is that if you have a pipeline, metaphorically speaking, into the oil and gas revenue picture, if you contract with the state of New Mexico, chances are you're doing okay. If you're an employee of the state, you may not be getting pay raises like you'd like, or even that really over compensate for inflation, but you're doing okay. If you are in a non-oil and gas area of New Mexico, in a non-oil and gas industry within New Mexico, you're probably struggling a little bit. And this is one business owner in one part of New Mexico, but I've heard this from several in a similar boat in various other industries saying, yeah, times are pretty tough because, you know, we obviously had the inflation of 22 and 23. 24 it seemed to slow down nationwide. It's kind of surprising to hear a business owner talk about this kind of thing publicly.
Yeah, and then Paul, along this line is that the amount of government employment as a percentage in New Mexico is very, very high. But even above and beyond that is there. You alluded to it. Is there are a lot of revenue streams that are in the for-profit segment of the economy that are actually controlled by and dependent on government as well. And so, if you kind of add those in there, there is just a lot of things like that. And so they used to say about the auto industry is that if the auto industry gets a cold, the economy of the United States gets pneumonia or something like that. But in New Mexico, is if government does something that impacts uh, a segment of the economy, the impact is probably more felt, particularly on a percentage basis, than it is in a lot of other states, like our friends in Texas and Arizona and even Colorado, where there's just so much less government in every way, shape, and form.
Yeah, well, diversifying the economy using the oil and gas money to do that, it is right up there with the very top priorities of the Rio Grande Foundation, but that would require some modicum of leadership from Santa Fe, and we're not seeing any of that in the governor's budget, of course, as we talked about a few weeks ago. No room for tax reduction, no room for rebates, nothing for businesses, etc. I'm not expecting great things from the Legislative Finance Committee, the legislature's own proposed budget, which we still haven't seen yet. Here we are getting under a week to go before the session kicks off. It would be nice to see what the legislators are going to put forth as they want to see a budget in the upcoming legislative session.
Yeah, and then just one final point, Paul, is that when people talk about, well, we need to be less dependent on oil and gas, a complementary statement is we need to diversify our economy. Well, what we see in Santa Fe, at least amongst much of the legislation that's proposed at this point, would just reduce the oil and gas industry, not do anything to increase the non-oil and gas part of the economy. And you'd have to say that if diversifying the economy is a goal of anyone in New Mexico here over the last many years, you'd have to say that effort is turning into a big giant F because it just hasn't happened.
Absolutely. It's hard to say anything else. A state that's developed and got the opportunity with this oil and gas revenue, we should be in much better shape overall. I would say no economic diversification has taken place in our state thanks to the oil and gas industry. In fact, not to get down too far down a rabbit hole, but something that we may do a little bit of a deep dive on is the something called the Dutch disease. Have you ever heard of this?
I cannot say that I have.
It is a economic concept that describes a phenomenon in the economy where rapid development of one sector of the economy, particularly natural resources, precipitates a decline in the other sectors. Now, this typically winds up as a national thing because one of the first attributes they say is it is often characterized by a substantial appreciation of the domestic currency. Now, we don't have a currency in the state of New Mexico, thank God, but I do think that the Dutch disease, as it is known, is something that we might have a bit of a case of in the state of New Mexico. So,
Yeah, and Paul, it's similar, if not, maybe this is just the more economically sophisticated word of the curse of resources or something. Where they talk about places like Nigeria that has a lot of resources, but their other economy doesn't grow, and we're certainly seeing that in New Mexico right now.
yeah, it's something that we'll do a little more maybe thought and research and writing about once we get past the legislative session. We'll see if the Dutch disease worsens or if we have a cure somehow in this session.
Maybe Pfizer will come out with an mRNA vaccine
Oh
for the
boy,
Dutch disease.
ouch. Well, you can you can count on the governor to wag her finger and mandate it, and maybe we'll get some masks, and we can do COVID 2.0 to address the Dutch
Economic
disease.
COVID.
Yeah. All right. Well, without further ado, Mark Zuckerberg recently made some very big statements about the changes going on at Facebook, and while I certainly attribute the success that that we have had in breaking through some of the internet censorship, I hand that to President Trump. The Rio Grande Foundation was part of a coalition called the Free Speech Alliance that was put forth by the Media Research Center, a group founded by L. Brent Bozell. And gosh, when I was in Washington in the 90s, Media Research Center was going strong. So these people have been at it for a very long time. I'll admit that I didn't quite see, and the 90s were a different era. I don't know that media censorship and misinformation were quite as bad at any time until really the COVID pandemic kicked off. But it was great to see Mark Zuckerberg himself saying, "Hey, we're going to let up on the censorship. We're going to instate a community notes kind of mechanism that is similar to what X or Twitter has done." And just good news. I think this is one of the fundamental differences at this point between, broadly speaking, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They see this as a positive for these companies to, at the government's behest, often really crack down on what is said online. We ourselves were cracked down upon by Google via YouTube during COVID, where at least one of our interviews was taken down directly because of some of the statements being made about the COVID pandemic and some of the issues with that. But a big thing, and I won't. We're not going to take credit for this change. Again, I think President Trump's victory in the election is the big one. Obviously, the Free Speech Alliance and conservative voices and groups making it an issue certainly helped. So we're happy to play a small part.
Yeah, and then there's announcements that that Facebook has gotten rid of a lot of its executives that seemed like they were of the woke persuasion. Politicians and pundits on the left, including the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, was critical of this move. So, yeah, this is a big thing. It's interesting. I'm not always shocked by things. I'm surprised, and maybe this was a surprise, is that the battle for free speech, how strong that became over the past several years. And I think that COVID COVID did not cause any of these issues, but it caused certain issues like free speech to be challenged more strongly, more quickly than would have happened otherwise, which looks like that might have been the undoing of certain forces with that. But again, I don't think we've seen the last of the efforts to suppress free speech on the internet in the United States.
Oh, I think that is a very safe bet. Uh, although I do think that the rubber truly hits the road in a few years, say the end of the Trump administration, and whether Facebook backslides. We haven't seen anything from Google and, of course, YouTube. They have remained pretty unapologetic in their approach to free speech. Of course, it required Twitter to be purchased by Elon Musk, and one can have their disagreements with Elon Musk's management of that social media site, but certainly it is a freer place nowadays than it was during the darkest days of COVID. And of course, the Hunter Biden laptop story via the New York Post and their website was one of the most notorious cases of censorship that we've seen in a very long time in this country, where the story was literally impossible to tweet or post in various social media sites, uh, even though, as far as I can tell, the information contained was 100% truthful. So,
Yeah, and that's a great point, Paul. Is the reason this is so, I think, such an important turning point is so much of the censorship was not censoring quote unquote fake news. It was censoring the truth and replacing it with falsehood. And so, or just leaving a void. So, yeah, interesting to know. And it's good to know that maybe the market for free speech took an upturn recently.
all right. Well, Wallethub has a new report that just came out as of January 13th. Best and worst states to raise a family. And as we so often do, we don't just look at the top line results, but uh, in this case, the top line results or the bottom line results, depends on how you look at things. New Mexico comes in dead last, 50th in terms of best places or worst places to raise a family. Uh, there are a few metrics. New Mexico performs well on precisely none of them. And here we go. So, family fun. Now, that might sound like a frivolous one, but as somebody who's the parent of kids, it's great if you have families that also have kids in your area. It's nice if you have activities, things to do, recreation centers, parks, etc. That's what family fun is all about. New Mexico is 39th. If you look at health and safety, obviously that's a very core issue. We're 47th. What is health and safety? Some of the metrics uh, in there: uninsured children, pediatricians per capita, children's hospitals per capita, quality of hospitals, infant mortality, life expectancy at birth, climate disasters, air pollution, water quality, violent crimes, property crimes, and share of children that go to safe schools. There's a few others, but by and large, those are pretty solid. And New Mexico, 47th in that. Education and child care, New Mexico ranks 50th. Uh, some of the metrics in that one: quality of public schools. We don't need to further beat that dead horse. Public high school graduation, child care services, daycare quality, child care costs, parental leave. We don't agree with everything in the report, but that is one of the variables. Number of child care workers per capita, and number of children age 16 to 6 to 17 who participate in extracurricular activities, and others who perform community service or volunteer work. All right, we move on to, and we were 50th in that area. Affordability, New Mexico 44th in affordability. Normally an area we do okay in, but housing affordability, credit score, mortgage debt, uh, non-mortgage debt, people who save money for their child's college education, paying medical bills, paid family leave, another one we're not thrilled about, but overall the indexes are good. Median annual family income, we are 44th. In the final category, socioeconomics. We wind up with separation and divorce rate, current marriage duration, two-parent family share, wealth gap, families living in poverty, food stamps, unemployment, underemployment, job security. New Mexico winds up 47th. A few notable things: median family income, New Mexico's dead last, 50th. In terms of childcare costs, we're 49th. That's a little bit of a surprise, but maybe gross receipts tax has something to do with that. Violent crimes per capita, dead last. We're tied with several other states for that. Percent of families in poverty, 48th. Looks like they used the traditional poverty measure, not the supplemental index as well. Separation and divorce rate, 50th. A
Yes,
surprise one.
yeah, Paul, you know what? I was just looking through as you were talking. That one surprised me. That's not one that has,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's never come up in the history of the podcast, but that is an interesting one. And when you think about that, you know, two parent households, we all know how much better those are for children. So, you know, that is one that I think does have a lot of power, and that is an interesting one.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, you know, don't agree with every single aspect of that report, but I think it is fair to say that we uh, ranked dead last, and that's not a surprise. Real quick, I just Googled U.S. News and World Report, their divorce rate by state, and New Mexico's number 10, so 10th highest. Uh, I think if I was going to take a stab at it, New Mexico's poor performance is driven more by the out of wedlock births where there's never a marriage to begin with, and it's just not having kids in that relationship or anything that holds up past that particular
Yes, single
activity.
parent households.
Yeah.
They use a number of terms, but yeah, that is an interesting one.
So your comments, Wally.
Well, if first of all, I do think Wallethub does a pretty darn good job, and believe they do. You know, they have quite a cottage industry of putting these reports out all the time, but they are not clickbait. You know, they use studies, they use indices, and the fact is that if you're to ask the typical New Mexican on the street, a study just came out with number one being good and number 50 being bad. Are we more likely to be number one or number 50? They would say we're number 50, and it doesn't matter what the topic is. And so then on things like this, when you blend a few of these things together towards, you know, something like, is it good for families? Is it good for retirees? Is it good for business growth? Whatever it is, you're likely to not be in the very top 10%, 25%, or even top half. And so, you know, uh, I guess the good news is there's nowhere but up on a lot of these things, but we do need to start making some progress in some of these key areas, or that will be the that will be the fate of New Mexico going forward. And you know, we used to just say what, thank you for Mississippi, or or Alabama or some other states. Well, guess what? Some of the other states that we used to be there arm in arm with there at the bottom have made progress, and we have not.
Yeah, and I will add in that if you put families up as a enterprise in kind of like the Amador Las Cruces that we talked about earlier, families don't really directly benefit from oil and gas. I mean, you can argue that they benefit from some level of spending and not having cuts in their schools, but we're not talking about a situation in New Mexico where there's any threat of spending cuts in the public schools. The trajectory of spending is rocketing upward, as is every aspect of the state budget, state government programs. They have more money. Maybe they sometimes have an issue finding people to work in some of these jobs because the labor force is depleted. But that is again relating to if your state is ranked 50th, and it's never, in recent memory, it's not at the top at all. It's always towards the bottom. But if you have this opportunity, this one time opportunity with the oil and gas money that we have to do something substantive, and you're not doing it, uh, you're further entrenching our results at the very bottom. And look, I think I have the answers, or at least some of the answers. I'm not saying we have all the answers at the Rio Grande Foundation. I'm not saying there's not even space for enhanced government programs in some certain specific areas to help out our families and improve things. But when you are not doing anything at all along the lines of what we recommend, which specifically focuses on tax reduction, job growth, economic growth, and education policy reform. Those are the big ones. When you're not doing any of that, well, uh, you get what you get.
Yeah, and then one of the things that we do okay on indices are on inputs, meaning our spending on education is pretty good, but our quality of education is not very good. And so, that's one of those. They used to say if you have run out of ideas, throw money at it. Well, New Mexico hasn't run out of ideas, but they've run out of ideas that are palatable by the teachers union and other special interest groups for things, and so they throw more money at it, but aren't getting the kind of performance that they would like. And then the other issue is a lot of these are things are interrelated, Paul, and so it's not. Uh, Living in a poor family, you are not sentenced to not being able to get a good education, but it makes it a lot tougher. There's just, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have access to health care, but it makes it a lot tougher. There are just a lot of things that start to compound over time. And man, it would be nice for us to start to see huge progress anywhere, to give us some hope that the basement, the bottom of the 1 through 50 rankings is not our permanent location for our state.
And finally, it is worth noting that we are at the bottom with Mississippi, West Virginia, Nevada, Oklahoma. The top states are Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Dakota, Nebraska, and New Hampshire. Now, one can argue certainly that uh, there are demographic and population uh, kind of aspects to this, and not all of these states are where Americans are moving to. Certainly, Massachusetts and Minnesota. I wouldn't say North Dakota is a particularly fast-growing state, or particularly, uh, you know, a state that people are moving towards. That's not what this is really all about. This is more of a uh, family structure and quality of life indicator. So, just because you have the high quality of life doesn't mean you're going to stay put in Minnesota, North Dakota. New York's number 6, Illinois number 7. A lot of these states are shrinking in their uh, overall population, and people are quite frankly moving to other states like Utah, which is surprisingly low, 20th. You would think that they would be, as they so often are, a top performer. Texas 30th, uh, and then you have, let's see, Arizona 31st. So, or no, Arizona's 41st. So, it's not that New Mexico is, in this particular case, way down at the bottom while all of our neighbors are just cleaning house, kicking butt. We are in a region that, in this particular instance, doesn't perform quite as well as uh, some of the other more established communities in the Northeast and stronger social areas like all those Nordic immigrants that went to North Dakota and Minnesota. Just a fact.
Yeah, and then there's another factor about certain New England states. They're relatively small. They're relatively closed. They've been doing pretty well for a long time. They have not been hit with tons of immigration, which makes things challenging. And I think a lot of the Western states face that challenge. And then I just want to finally give a shout out to North Dakota. Man, the fact that they still have a state is credit to them. And I don't mean that. I mean that's just a rough place. They have close to 800,000 people. Their population's growing slightly, and they're in a they're a long way from anywhere. It's cold in the winter. It's hot in the summer. It's just a tough place to survive, much less to thrive. And so that when we look at places like New Mexico, it's like, yeah, we know if uh, if climate were if climate were what you needed to do or a top priority, and we do love our climate here in New Mexico, and I certainly do love it as well. Uh, North Dakota would be gone and we'd have 10 million people in New Mexico. But there are a lot of other policies in between where a state is from a climate point of view and success economically and elsewise.
Absolutely. All right. Albuquerque City Council, a little closer to home here, voted on two significant policy changes. One of them I would call a positive and a potential game changer, reduces the power and the ability of neighborhood associations to put a stop to local development. That strikes me as, generally speaking, a good thing. Certainly could be abused as well. Some of these policies regarding development, they are a double-edged sword, but I think it's safe to say that in Albuquerque, we have too many obstacles, too much red tape when it comes to development. I specifically linked to a post from our friend, the home builder Mackenzie Bishop, about that. And of course, home builders have their own interests, but uh, Albuquerque is filling up. We need, in terms of constructible space, we need to expedite permitting and move things forward. And development, especially private sector development, needs to be given the opportunity to take off. Now, that's the positive. On the flip side, there was a piece of legislation, a bill that passed to fine property owners in the downtown area up to $500 a day if their building is considered dilapidated or is vacant. And just strikes me, put yourself in the shoes of a property owner in downtown Albuquerque. You're dealing with rampant crime, serious homeless issues. Are you sitting on a property hoping that a better day comes, that Mayor Keller doesn't get reelected, and suddenly we have a dawn of a new day and a new era in downtown Albuquerque? I got to think that if you're sitting on a piece of property down there, you might feel a little bit trapped. You might have some resources tied up in that property and not know what the heck to do with it. It just and I'm not sure that a lot of people are out there on the market trolling for fairly priced commercial real estate in downtown Albuquerque. It is not a attractive place by and large for businesses and economic development. So, a one step forward, one step back in the city of Albuquerque.
Yeah, Paul, that is a very strange one. When I first saw that, the thought came to mind is the beatings will continue until downtown improves. But the improvement, we certainly don't talk very much about homelessness and crime and the people that you see on the streets in downtown Albuquerque. Uh, we're not going to find the city of Albuquerque money if that doesn't improve over time. But we are going to punish the landlords, and so I need to think this one through. At some point, it might encourage a landlord to take a little bit lower rent in the short term with regard to that, because if you're facing, frankly, a daily negative rent, maybe having anything would be good. But boy, you can lock yourself into a situation where places are the only businesses are secondhand stores or pawn shops or whatever, and it could certainly backfire on an area. And I sort of have a feeling where this one isn't as straightforward as to what the impact is going to be, but I certainly think this is a kick in the dog situation, not addressing the problem.
Yeah. Um, so we'll see if these have any impact, positive or negative, each of them. So all we can do is wait and watch. Just a few additional things. RGF was in national review. We've talked about the poverty measure issue quite a bit on this show. That's what I talked about in national review just yesterday. So that's January 13th, Monday. You can go check that out. We'll be posting it on our website as well. uh, Obviously, California fires, a very tragic situation. Just a few brief thoughts there. New Mexico and California are both dry places. These fires in California are largely in private lands, developed home, areas of neighborhoods. New Mexico tends to get its fires in its federally managed, heavily wooded, kind of scenic areas. Obviously, both are tragic and unfortunate, but we definitely don't want to repeat the mistakes that were made in California, not keeping enough water in the reservoirs, not trimming and reducing the debris on the floor of forests and other lands. And it's tragic to see, and it's going to be very expensive to see what happens in California. Will they be able to rebuild? Will there be too much red tape? Will the environmentalists oppose and scotch plans to rebuild these neighborhoods? Will people be able to afford to rebuild, given the rapid cost escalation in California property values and just the materials used for building? Where will they ship all of the debris? Will they use? And I'm not being facetious here. They are restricting not just cars but trucks and their internal combustion engines. But also, where do you put all the devastation in that material? And finally, will politics in California change? Will people decide to move away from California to other places, possibly including New Mexico? These are all questions, a lot of questions at this point. Unfortunately, the fires are still raging, and my understanding is that as we talk about this Tuesday, the 14th of January, it's supposed to be a high wind day and conditions are going to deteriorate. So our prayers are with the folks in California, and we've got a lot of questions too as well.
Yes, Paul. And, I was thinking about this, and man, my heart does go out to the people of California. And I've seen some really hard hearted people talk about, well, those are multimillionaires. It's like, my goodness, anybody to lose their house. And then when you just look at the scope of the devastation, it's just heartbreaking. But, a couple of things is preparedness for fire and ability to have water. Guess what? Those have been extremely poorly dealt with by California. But lest you think that I am just pointing fingers at California, guess there's another state that I know relatively well that's really had a tough time on those issues, and that's New Mexico. Now, in California, a lot of the areas that they are having their fire problems, are on privately held, state held land right in the middle of urban and semi urban areas where New Mexico is. With the exception of the Rio Doso fires, has largely been a much more rural situation. But unless they make some changes, it's one of those trimming trees, reducing underbrush, cutting fire breaks, all the things that we have not done in New Mexico. California, this will occur again, and guess what? In New Mexico, it will occur again too. And it just seems like there is a lot of hand wringing over these, but there's never many projects that go forward. And if there are, and believe me, New Mexico has control burns, but we do just the bare minimum necessary to say that we've even done anything. And we'll see if the federal government treats California better than it's treated northern New Mexico in terms of their recovery from fire. So,
Absolutely. Well, last but not least, of course, we're all eagerly awaiting the inauguration of President Trump here in less than a week. So we will have uh, analysis, and we'll talk a little bit about, among other things, the inauguration next Monday. We will be talking as the governor is getting ready for her State of the State address next Tuesday as we dive into the 60-day legislative session. And that will, of course, be a big component of the next several weeks of Tipping Point, New Mexico shows. What are some of the bills flying at us? We know a few more. There's been some more pre-filed bills, and of course, we will have plenty more bills filed and pre-filed in the next several days, and of course, all the way through the 30-day point, the midway point of the legislative session, when they finally stop adding new bills to the mix up there. But I'm expecting this to be quite a busy legislative session. The swan song for this governor, another upsurge for the progressives, and a challenging year for conservative values Republicans. Now, real quick, last final notes on the legislature. Eliseo Alcon passed away, so we're saddened by that. Thoughts and prayers to his family. He had already resigned from the legislature. Harry Garcia, a moderate Democrat, a more moderate Democrat, was recommended, was put forth by both of the counties where that district is. The governor seems to not want Harry Garcia and seems to be looking for other options. Again, the question will be whether she somehow, if she's allowed to keep that seat open, and I think this may wind up in litigation, or whether the individual chosen by those counties can and should serve in the roundhouse. Where will that go? I don't know. It's going to be just one of those things to watch. And then Jared Hembry, a Republican from Chavez County, and that is a one-county district, has resigned for other health reasons. Chavez County is in the process of finding candidates and finding somebody who can fill that seat. And we'll see if the governor is more expeditious in that regard, because I find it hard to imagine her trying to tell Chavez County who they should or should not put up. They're going to choose their person, and hopefully the governor is reasonable and fills the seat very quickly so that at least that seat can be filled. Same goes for the Harry Garcia seat, of course.
Yeah, Paul, it's always unnerving that the legislature is in session. And, when I hear the guests leading up to what might be passed, just calls to mind for me an old Western. It's like hide the women and children, put up the livestock, get your guns out, protect your wallet. The legislature is getting ready to meet. And so hopefully cooler heads will prevail than have prevailed recently, and we'll actually do some things that are not politically expedient and palatable for those who are in office, but actually help the problems facing the citizens in New Mexico.
All right. Well, we will leave it there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.